Have you ever felt invisible? Like your pain didn't matter to anyone, like your tears fell in a place where no one was watching. I have. My name is Hagar, and I was a slave, an Egyptian woman caught in someone else's story, used for someone else's purpose. I was the forgotten one, the one without a voice, without a choice. But in my darkest hour, when I ran into the wilderness with nothing but despair and a broken heart, something happened that changed everything. God saw me. Not Abram, not Sarai, God himself. He saw me when I was invisible to everyone else. He spoke my name when I thought I had been erased from every story that mattered. And in that moment, I learned something that would echo through generations. God sees the forgotten ones. He hears the cries of those the world overlooks. He meets us in the wilderness when everyone else has turned away. My story is not just about survival, it's about being seen, being known, being loved by the God who notices every tear, every trembling breath, every silent prayer whispered into the wind. This is my testimony, and it speaks to everyone who has ever felt alone. If you believe in the power of this story to touch the heart and transform thoughts, sign up now. Together, we can bring these teachings to those who haven't had the chance to hear them yet. I was not born to be part of this story. That is what I told myself in those early days, when the sun rose over Canaan and I ground grain for Sarai's breakfast, when I drew water from the well and felt the eyes of free women upon me. Measuring, dismissing. I was Egyptian. I was a slave. I belonged to Sarai, wife of Abram, and that was all I was meant to be. My hands knew work before they knew rest. My eyes learned to look down before they learned to look up. In Pharaoh's house, where I was born, I had been one servant among hundreds. But when Pharaoh sent Sarai away, loaded with gifts and gold and livestock, I was given to her a gift, a possession, a breathing tool to make her life easier. I did not ask to leave Egypt. I did not ask to follow these strange people into a land I did not know, to serve a God I did not understand. But slaves do not ask, we obey. The camp of Abram was vast. Tents stretched across the hills like a city that moved with the seasons. Flocks bleated in the distance. The smell of roasting meat and fresh bread drifted through the air at evening. There was wealth here, abundance. But there was also something else. A sadness that clung to Sarai's tent like morning mist. She was beautiful, even in her older years. Her skin was smooth, her movements graceful, but her eyes carried a grief that no amount of gold could ease. She had no child, and in this world, a woman without a child was a woman without worth. I heard her pray sometimes, late at night when she thought no one was listening. I would lie on my mat near the entrance of her tent, and I would hear her voice, low and aching, speaking to the God of Abram. "Why, Lord? Why have you closed my womb?" Her words were full of longing, confusion, anger. I did not understand this God she spoke to. In Egypt, we had many gods, gods of the Nile, gods of the harvest, gods of life and death. But Abram and Sarai spoke of one God, a God who made promises, a God who spoke. Abram believed this God had promised him descendants as numerous as the stars. But Sarai's womb remained empty. Years passed. I learned the rhythm of their life. I learned to anticipate Sarai's needs before she spoke them. I learned to be invisible when she needed solitude, and present when she needed comfort. I learned to watch her face when Abram's other servants spoke of their children, the way her jaw tightened, the way she turned away. I was young then. I did not yet understand the desperation that grows in a woman's heart when time is slipping away and hope is fading like the last light of day. But I would learn. One evening, as I prepared Sarai's bed, smoothing the blankets and arranging the pillows, she called me to her. Hagar! I turned, surprised. She rarely spoke my name. Her eyes were different that night. Determined, resolved. I have been thinking, she said slowly, her voice measured. The Lord has prevented me from bearing children, but there is another way. I waited, my heart beginning to beat faster, though I did not yet know why. You will go to my husband, she said. Perhaps I can build a family through you. The words hung in the air between us. I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. I understood what she was asking, what she was commanding. In that moment, I was not Hagar the woman. I was Hagar the slave, the instrument, the vessel. I wanted to speak, to protest, to run. But slaves do not run, we obey. That night, I lay awake on my mat, staring into darkness, feeling the weight of what was to come pressing down on my chest like a stone. I thought of Egypt, of the home I barely remembered, of a life I had never been allowed to choose. And I wondered if this God of Abraham, this God who made promises and spoke from heaven, if he saw me at all, or if I was invisible even to him. Abraham came to me because Sarai commanded it. There was no tenderness in it, no love. I was a means to an end, a solution to a problem that was not mine to solve. But my body did not know the difference between duty and desire. My womb did not understand that I was merely a tool in someone else's plan. Within weeks, I knew. I was carrying a child. Abram's child. The realization washed over me like a wave. Joy and terror mixed together until I could not tell one from the other. I pressed my hand against my belly, feeling nothing yet but knowing everything had changed. I had value now. I had given Abraham what Sarai could not. For the first time in my life, I was not invisible. I told Sarai first, as was proper. I kept my eyes lowered, my voice respectful. Mistress, I believe I am with child. I expected joy. I expected relief. Instead, I saw her face harden, her eyes narrow. The air between us turned cold. She did not speak for a long moment. Then, very quietly, she said, "You may go." I left her tent feeling uneasy, though I could not name why. In the days that followed, something shifted in our camp. The other servants began to look at me differently, not with contempt anymore, but with a cautious respect. I was carrying the heir of Abraham. I was the mother of his first son. And slowly, without even meaning to, I began to carry myself differently. I lifted my head when I walked. I spoke with more confidence. When Sarai gave me orders, I did not hurry to obey as I once had. I began to look at her the way she had always looked at me, with pity. She was barren. I was fruitful. She had failed where I had succeeded. Pride crept into my heart like a serpent, silent and subtle. I did not recognize it at first. I thought I was simply claiming the dignity that had been denied me all my life. But pride is a dangerous companion, especially for the powerless. One morning, Sarai called me to help her dress. I came slowly, taking my time, letting her wait. When I entered her tent, her eyes were blazing. "You think you are better than me now," she said, her voice shaking. "You think because you carry his child, you are more than a slave." I should have been silent. I should have lowered my eyes and begged forgiveness. But I did not. "I carry what you could not," I said quietly. The words hung between us like a blade. Her hand struck my face before I could move. The sting brought tears to my eyes, but it was not the pain that hurt most. It was the sudden understanding of what I had done, how far I had fallen into foolishness. Sarai's voice was ice. "Get out of my sight." I stumbled from her tent, my cheek burning, my heart pounding. But worse was to come. That evening, I heard Sarai's voice raised in anger inside Abram's tent. I could not make out all the words, but I heard my name, sharp and bitter on her tongue. When Abram finally emerged, his face was troubled. He found me near the cooking fire and gestured for me to follow. We walked a short distance from the camp to where the evening shadows were long and cool. "Sarai is your mistress," he said without looking at me. "Whatever she does to you, I will not intervene. You are in her hands." His words were a sentence, a verdict, an abandonment. I was carrying his child, but I was still just a slave. In that moment, I understood the terrible truth. I had no protector, no advocate, no safety. The days that followed were bitter. Sarai's treatment grew harsh. She gave me the hardest work. She spoke to me with contempt. She found fault with everything I did. And I endured it, day after day, my belly growing, my spirit shrinking. I felt the child move within me, tiny flutters like the wings of a bird, and I would rest my hand there and whisper to the life inside, "I will protect you, I promised. Somehow, I will keep you safe." But I did not know how. One night, as I lay awake beneath the stars, listening to the sounds of the camp settling into sleep, I felt a desperation rise in me like floodwaters. I could not stay here. I could not raise my child in this place, beneath the weight of Sarai's hatred and Abram's indifference. I had to run. Even if it meant dying in the wilderness, it was better than dying slowly here, stripped of dignity, ground down to nothing. Before dawn, while darkness still covered the earth, I gathered a small skin of water and a bit of bread. I looked once more at the camp, at the tents silhouetted against the lightning sky. Then I turned south, toward Egypt, toward home. And I ran. The wilderness swallowed me whole. By midday, the camp was far behind, hidden beyond hills and rocky outcroppings. The sun climbed higher, fierce and unforgiving. The landscape stretched endlessly, sand and stone, thorny bushes, the occasional twisted tree offering no shade. My water was already half gone. My feet, unused to walking such distances, ached and bled. But I kept moving, driven by fear and desperation and a wild hope that somehow I would reach Egypt, that somehow I would survive. The child turned within me, a gentle reminder of why I had fled, why I could not go back. I rested when I could no longer walk. I found a small spring barely more than a trickle near the road to Shur. The water was cool and sweet, and I drank deeply, splashing my face, trying to wash away the dust and exhaustion. Then I collapsed in the shade of a scraggly acacia tree and wept. I wept for my life, which had never been my own. I wept for my child, who would be born into the same servitude I had known. I wept for the loneliness that pressed down on me like the weight of the sky. I had never felt so alone, so forgotten, so invisible. "Hagar." The voice cut through my grief like a blade of light. I looked up, startled, my heart racing. A figure stood near the spring, radiant and terrible. I could not look directly at him, the light was too bright, too pure. But I knew, with a certainty that shook me to my core, that this was no ordinary traveler. This was an angel of the Lord. The God of Abraham had sent his messenger to me, a slave, an Egyptian, a runaway. "Hagar, servant of Sarai," the angel said, his voice both gentle and commanding. "Where have you come from, and where are you going?" I could barely speak. My throat was tight with tears and wonder. "I am running away from my mistress Sarai," I whispered. The truth laid bare. The angel looked at me with eyes that saw everything: my pain, my pride, my fear, my love for the child I carried. He saw all of me, and he did not turn away. "Return to your mistress," he said, "and submit to her authority." The words struck me like a blow. Return. Go back to the very place I had fled. Back to Sarai's cruelty and Abram's indifference. But before I could protest, before I could argue or plead, the angel continued, "I will surely multiply your offspring so that they cannot be numbered for multitude." My breath caught. He was speaking to me the way God had spoken to Abram, a promise, a future, a purpose. "Behold, you are pregnant and shall bear a son," the angel said. "You shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has listened to your affliction." Ishmael. God hears. The Lord had listened to me. In my loneliness, in my desperation, in my invisible suffering, he had heard. Tears streamed down my face, but they were different now. Not tears of despair, but tears of wonder, of gratitude, of awe. "He shall be a wild donkey of a man," the angel continued, describing my son's future with words both strange and powerful. "His hand shall be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and he shall dwell over against all his kinsmen." My son would be free.strong.untamed. He would not live in servitude as I had. He would not bow to anyone. The angel's light began to fade, and I knew he was leaving. But I could not let this moment pass without speaking, without naming what had happened here. "You are Elroy," I said, my voice trembling. "The God who sees me." The name rose from the depths of my soul, a truth I had never known until this moment. All my life, I had been invisible. But God had seen me. He had known my name, my pain, my story. He had come to me, not to Abram in his tent, not to Sarai with her prayers, but to me, a runaway slave in the wilderness. I named the well Bir Lahai, the well of the living one who sees me. And I knew I would return to that name again and again in the years to come, whenever I felt forgotten, whenever I doubted my worth. I had been seen by God himself, and nothing would ever be the same. I returned to Sarai's tent, not because I wanted to, but because God had commanded it. Not because my circumstances had changed, but because I had changed. I had been seen. The journey back was long, but my steps were different now, steadier, more certain. I carried within me not just a child, but a promise. God himself had spoken over my son's life. He would be named Ishmael, and his descendants would be too numerous to count. I was part of a story larger than my pain. When I arrived at the camp, I did not announce myself with grand words or bold declarations. I simply returned to my place, my work, my duties. But inside, I was not the same Hagar who had fled. Sarai looked at me with suspicion and anger when I first appeared in her tent. Her eyes narrowed. Her mouth tightened. "You came back," she said, as if she could not believe it. "Yes, mistress," I replied quietly. I did not tell her about the angel. I did not speak of the promise or the name God had given my son. These things were too precious, too sacred to cast before someone who would not understand. I kept them hidden in my heart, like treasures buried deep. The months passed slowly. My belly grew round and heavy. The child moved within me, strong and active, and every time I felt him kick, I whispered his name. Ishmael, God hears. Abram came to me one evening as I sat outside my tent, my hands resting on my swollen belly. He looked older than I remembered, his face lined with thought and care. "The child," he said. "When he is born, what shall we name him?" I looked up at him, this man who had used me, who had abandoned me to Sarai's cruelty, who had never asked what I wanted or needed. And I spoke with a quiet authority that surprised even me. "His name is Ishmael," I said. God has heard my affliction, and this is the name he has chosen. Abram's eyes widened. He did not question me. He did not argue. He simply nodded, as if he recognized that something greater than human choice had already decided this matter. When my time came, I labored through the night with only the midwife beside me. The pain was fierce, consuming, but I held on to the promise I had been given. God sees me. God hears me. At dawn, my son was born. They placed him in my arms, and I looked down at his tiny face, his dark eyes, his perfectly formed hands grasping at the air. Ishmael, I whispered. You are seen. You are heard. You are loved. Abram came to see his son. He held the boy carefully, his weathered hands gentle. And for a moment, I saw something in his eyes, pride, perhaps, or hope. He is strong, Abram said. He will be a mighty man. I wanted to tell him everything the angel had said. I wanted to remind him that this child had been promised descendants, that God himself had named him. But I held my tongue. Some truths are too sacred to share with those who do not have ears to hear. The years that followed were strange and difficult. Ishmael grew quickly, a wild and energetic boy. He ran through the camp with the freedom I had never known, climbing rocks and chasing animals, and laughing with a joy that made my heart ache. He was everything the angel had promised: strong, independent, and tame. But he was also mine, my son. My gift from the God who saw me. Abram loved him. I could see it in the way he taught the boy, the way he called him my son with pride in his voice. For 13 years, Ishmael was Abram's only son, the heir. The fulfillment of promise. Or so I thought. Then, everything changed. One day, the camp was filled with whispers. God had appeared to Abram again. He had changed his name to Abraham and Sarai's name to Sarah, and he had promised again that Sarah herself would bear a son. I felt the ground shift beneath me once more. Sarah, who was 90 years old, would have a child? It seemed impossible, but I had seen enough of this God to know that impossible was a word he did not recognize. When Isaac was born, I watched from a distance as Sarah held her baby with a joy so fierce it seemed to light up her entire face. She had what she had always wanted. And suddenly, Ishmael and I became inconvenient reminders of a time she wanted to forget. The day of Isaac's weaning feast, I should have known something was about to break. The camp was full of celebration. Music and laughter filled the air. Abraham had spared no expense: roasted meats, fresh bread, wine flowing freely. Ishmael, nearly 14 years old now, was playing with some of the younger children. I watched him from the edge of the gathering, proud of the young man he was becoming. Then I saw Sarah watching him too. Her face was dark with something I could not name: jealousy, perhaps, or fear. She called Abraham aside, and though I could not hear her words, I saw her gesturing toward Ishmael, her voice sharp and insistent. Abraham's face fell. He looked pained, conflicted, but Sarah was relentless. That evening, Abraham came to me. His eyes were red, as if he had been weeping. "Hagar," he said, his voice breaking, "you and the boy must leave." The words struck me like physical blows. "Leave," I repeated, unable to comprehend. "Where would we go?" "Sarah insists," he said miserably. "She wants Isaac to be the only heir. She will not tolerate Ishmael in the camp any longer." I felt rage and terror rise in me like a storm. "He is your son," I cried. "Your firstborn. You loved him." "I do love him," Abraham said, tears now streaming down his face. "But God has spoken to me. He said not to be distressed about the boy and your slave woman. He promised that he will make Ishmael into a great nation because he is my offspring. A promise. Another promise. But this one felt like exile. Abraham pressed a skin of water and some bread into my hands. That was all water and bread for a journey into the wilderness with my son. At dawn, we left. Ishmael walked beside me, confused and hurt. He had done nothing wrong, yet he was being cast out like refuse. "Where are we going, Mother?" he asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "But God will provide." I wanted to believe it. I needed to believe it. But as the hours passed and the sun climbed higher and hotter, as our water ran low and the bread was consumed, doubt began to creep in. We wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba, lost and desperate. By the second day, the water was gone. Ishmael grew weak. His lips cracked. His steps faltered. I could not bear to watch my son die. When he could walk no farther, I laid him in the shade of a bush. Then I walked away, perhaps 100 yards, and collapsed on the ground. "I cannot watch the boy die," I sobbed, my voice lost in the vastness of the desert. I wept with a despair deeper than anything I had known, deeper even than the first time I had fled into this wilderness. Then I heard it. Not the angel's voice this time, but God's own voice, calling from heaven. "What troubles you, Hagar? Do not fear, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. God has heard, Ishmael. God hears." The name I had been given years ago, echoing now in my darkest hour. "Rise, lift up the boy, and hold him fast with your hand," God continued, "for I will make him into a great nation." Then God opened my eyes, and I saw what had been there all along, a well of water, clear and cool, just yards away. I ran to it, filled the skin with water, and rushed back to Ishmael. I lifted his head and helped him drink. Color returned to his face. Strength returned to his limbs. We had been saved again by the God who sees, the God who hears. We stayed in the wilderness. It became our home. God was with Ishmael as he grew, just as he had promised. My son became an expert archer, strong and free, living the wild, untamed life the angel had foretold. I found him a wife from Egypt, connecting him back to my homeland, to the place where my own story began. And I watched as God's promise unfolded before my eyes, Ishmael's 12 sons, the beginning of a great nation. In those quiet years in the wilderness, I thought often of the well where the angel had first appeared to me. Bir Lahiroi, the well of the living one who sees me. I had been a slave, a castaway, a woman the world overlooked and discarded. But God had seen me, not once, but twice. In my pride and in my desperation. In my running away and in my casting out. He had seen me, named me, blessed me, saved me. And I learned the most important truth of my life. We are never invisible to God. Not the slave girl, not the outcast, not the forgotten ones. He sees us all. He hears every cry, knows every name, holds every story. My life was not the one I would have chosen. I did not ask to be a slave, to bear a child in servitude, to be exiled into the wilderness. But in all of it, through all of it, God was present. He was my provider when I had nothing. He was my protector when I was vulnerable. He was the living one who saw me when I was invisible to everyone else. And if he saw me, he sees you. Whatever wilderness you are walking through, whatever rejection you have faced, whatever pain has convinced you that you do not matter, know this: you are seen, you are heard, you are known by name. The God of Hagar is your God too, and he will never, ever abandon you. This is my testimony. This is my gift to you. May you find your own well in the wilderness. May you know the God who sees. If you believe in the power of this story to touch the heart and transform thoughts, sign up now. Together, we can bring these teachings to those who haven't had the chance to hear them yet.